Welcome to the webinar on the ARC project. ARC stands for Assessment, Resources, and Curriculum. ARC is a National Science Foundation funded grant. I'm the PI. My name is Melissa Dark, and my co-PI is Matt Bishop from the University of California, Davis, and a strong collaborator on the project is Nancy Stevens. All of the ARC resources are available to you as an educator for no cost at teachcyber.org. So, as we've designed ARC, we've thought to ourselves, if I were a teacher, what would I want? How would I want to use ARC to help me figure out what I should teach? Which topics, how deep, and in what order? If I were a teacher, how would I want to use ARC to help me plan lessons? How would I go into ARC and figure out what content I need to put into my lessons, what examples I need to give to students that will help make things stick and click? And then finally, if I were a teacher, how would I use ARC to get useful and timely assessment questions? So ARC was built to answer these questions, and what I hope to be able to show you through the course of this short webinar is how to use it for questions like this. So ARC has 6 knowledge areas. They're listed here: data, software, network, system, organizational, and societal security. And those 6 knowledge areas we didn't make up. They are based on this CSEC supplement that is referenced over here. CSEC is an accreditation standard published by the ACM, used to accredit undergraduate and associate degree programs. We created a supplement based on that to say what should go into a Cyber 1 course, Introduction to Cybersecurity. You can download that document and look through it at no charge. So CSEC has these 6 knowledge areas, and then it has a total of 74 learning outcomes. What we did on the ARC project is take all 6 knowledge areas and all 74 learning outcomes and build it out to include 1,304 knowledge statements and 1,128 assessment items. Altogether, it's pretty big. And so what I'm going to do today is just show you a little sliver. And the sliver I'm going to show you comes from the network security knowledge area. So ARC is available at teachcyber.org. If you already have a teachcyber.org account, you can just log in and download all of the ARC resources at no cost to you. If you don't yet have a TeachCyber account, it's free to register. So you create an account, I approve it, and then you download all of the resources. So it should be pretty simple. When you get in there, you would get either the curriculum guides or the item banks, or you can get them both. And the curriculum guides are there to help you plan new courses or new units, or to modify new courses or new units. We have some teachers who tell us, I am trying to use the curriculum guides just to help me increase my own personal understanding of the scope and depth of cybersecurity. Or you use the curriculum guides to help you design aligned assessments. And so that takes us over to the item banks. There are 960 multiple choice items in a spreadsheet and 168 open-ended items in a PDF. Each of the items is tagged to one of the 74 learning outcomes, and I'll show that more specifically to you in a few minutes. Teachers told us they wanted a mix of multiple choice and open-ended because they, in fact, do both to have balanced assessment. With regard to the items in the item bank, You can use them as is, or you are welcome to adapt them for your own classroom. We use a Creative Commons license for intellectual property. It gives you the right to use the items, to share the items, to make derivative works, and the only thing we don't allow is for you to sell any of it. So if you were to open one of the guides right now, in fact, I'm going to open a guide. So this is what the network security guide looks like. This is the front page. It has some instructions. And then right here on the second page is this concept map. And we were looking at that concept map here. And so the concept map is organized and shows you that within network security there are three main topics: architecture, attacks, and defenses. And underneath architecture there are a total of 8 learning outcomes. You see them there in the gold. And underneath attacks there are a total of 3 learning outcomes. And under defenses there are a total of 3 learning outcomes. For the sake of this demo, I've decided I'm going to use these 2 learning outcomes, NS13 and NS14. So let's take a minute and just read those together. NS13 says students will be able to compare and summarize the strengths and limitations of representative defense solutions such as firewalls, intrusion detection systems, antivirus systems, etc. There are a couple of important words in that, several important words in that sentence, but representative is important because it's not meant to be an exhaustive list, and etc. is meant to emphasize that there are probably more that need to be included. So compare and summarize strengths and limitations. And then NS14 says, give an example of a network architecture that provides defense in depth and explain how it does so. So I specifically chose to use NS13 and NS14 as my examples in this demo because these learning outcomes scaffold, right? In order for students to do NS14, they need to learn NS1 through NS13. So that's part of the way it helps you sequence your course or your unit. And in order to do NS14, they have to not just understand network architecture generally, they need to be able to understand it in a specific instance. What is the architecture of this system? And they need to not only be able to understand attacks generally, but they need to be able to understand attacks in the context of this system, this architecture. And if they can understand a system's architecture and how attacks would work on that system, then they're in a position to be able to think about how to use various defenses, given the benefits and the limitations of those defenses, to build a defense in depth plan for that system. So let's unpack this a little further. We're going to go into the ARC curriculum guide again. We're going to look at some of the specific knowledge statements. And as we do that, what I'm asking you to do is to think with me about the knowledge statements, to kind of unpack each LO using the knowledge statements, and to think about what is the scope of this LO, what is the depth of this LO, what are key terms, and what are examples. So as you think about that, hopefully it starts to help you take a step toward building lesson sequences and picking instructional resources. Or maybe you're a teacher who's already teaching network security and already teaching defense in depth. And so here you could use the ARC curriculum guides to help you think about what are gaps, what do I already teach, and in all of these knowledge statements, what are some new ideas that I could use to strengthen my curriculum, to add more depth, or to give further examples. And then finally, you'll be able to look at the ARC assessment guides to say, that is what I'm teaching, or that's what I'm going to be teaching. And so now how do I use the knowledge in the curriculum assessment guide to go into the item bank and to select item banks for my use? Okay? So we're going to go back into the guide for just a minute. So we were here a minute ago, and this is what you'll be looking at when you download the guides from the Teach Cyber website. And we're going to NS13. So let's scroll down to NS13 real quick. And here it is. We've already seen this statement once. Compare and summarize the strengths and limitations of representative defense solutions, such as. So here in bullets, we see a list of knowledge statements, bullets and sub-bullets. And they're organized, they're grouped. So this list of knowledge statements is all about security controls, and this list of knowledge statements is all about representative technical controls and their benefits and limitations. Okay, so I have that over here, which might make it a little easier to view it. So let's go back to the slides. And let's just walk through these 4 knowledge statements. So the first one reads, security controls are protection measures for a system. So we, first of all, want students to understand that's what controls are. They're protection measures. They're also referred to as safeguards or countermeasures. So we would want students to be able to understand that controls, safeguards, and countermeasures are synonymous terms. They could encounter any one of them, and they need to know that it means all the same thing. Statement number 2. A physical control is one that prevents specific physical actions from occurring. Physical security controls include things such as bollards, barricades, alarms, badges, access control vestibules, cameras, guards, locks, fencing, motion recognition, lighting, fire, temperature, moisture detection, and USB data blockers. So we would want students to understand physical controls prevent physical actions, and they come in a variety of forms. The third bullet then talks about technical controls, right? A technical control doesn't prevent a physical action. It prevents a virtual or a logical action. And again, it gives a list of examples. And then finally, administrative controls, policies, procedures, and governance. So together, these four statements are saying security controls, aka safeguards or countermeasures, are protection measures for a system, and they can be physical, technical, and or administrative. So you remember when we were looking at the PDF just a minute ago, the second set of statements were about representative technical controls. And I don't have it verbatim here because it's just a lot of verbiage. So I've consolidated a little bit. So each one of those statements first gives a representative technical control. So firewall, IDS, IPS, data loss prevention, SIEM. So it names it, then it briefly describes the purpose. Briefly describes the purpose, and then gives a statement about the benefits and the limitations of that particular representative technical control. So together, if we were in the ARC guide right now, and not just in my slides, these statements are meant to help you as a teacher think about, what am I already teaching if I'm already teaching it? What am I not teaching? What connections am I not making? What elaborations am I not providing that helps students understand? You don't just use a firewall. There are a number of different kinds of technical controls you use to protect networks. Technical controls work alongside with physical controls and administrative controls to create a whole system that protects the network. And when it comes to the technical controls, we would use a combination of things. We would use a combination of things because your network has an architecture. We learned about that in NS1 through NS8. And no one control is going to do everything for you, and controls have benefits and limitations. So you want to use a control for its benefits and try to account for or fortify a control based on its limitations. So I talked through all of that in hope to model for you how you might go into the ARC knowledge statements and start to think about it yourself. So now let's say, okay, I already do teach about those technical controls, and I teach a little bit about what they are, how they work, and their benefits and limitations. So now I want to use ARC to help me get some items out of the item bank. So now I want to show you that. This here, you're looking at just a single item. In a minute, we'll go to the full spreadsheet. This particular item is numbered NS13.04 because it's the fourth item that goes with the NS13 learning outcome that we've been working with. It's a multiple choice item. We've rated it as intermediate. We've got 3 ratings: basic, intermediate, and advanced. So the stem of the item, how does SIEM primarily utilize event logs? And then there are 4 answer choices, and one of them is the correct answer choice. So to see this particular item in the item bank, let's go look at the full item bank spreadsheet. So it's right here. We're in the network security tab. There's a data security tab, a system security, software security, organizational security, and societal security tab, one for each of the 6 knowledge areas. So we're in the network security tab, and we want to be looking for items that go with NS13 because that's the learning outcome we've been using. So the first thing that we could do is come over here to column A, and in fact we're just going to filter. Give me the items that go with NS13. And now we have a subset of the network security items. All of these go with NS13, and here's the item that we were looking at just a minute ago on the slides. So over here, I wanted to point out, whoops, I went too far. I wanted to point out a couple of other features that weren't on the slide I showed you. Column J includes correct answer feedback. We think that's probably important to you as a teacher if you're going to put this into a learning management system to provide feedback for the correct answer. And even more important is column K, which is the incorrect answer feedback. And over here are those ratings. So if you're a teacher that says, oh, I'm going to form a 15-item test for the end of the unit, and I want 2/3 of them to be basic items and 1/3 to be intermediate and advanced, you can do some filtering to look at just the basic or just the intermediate items. So that's how you would go into the item bank and select items for what you're already teaching or planning to teach. So what I'd like to do now is take a look at NS14. That's that synthesis LO. It brings together everything that students have learned across NS1 to NS13. And it says, okay, now we want you to, given a network architecture, create a defense in depth plan that works and explain your rationale. So students might be layering a variety of technical controls. You could modify this item and ask them to include or modify an item and ask them to include physical controls as well as administrative controls. So we're going to go back into the ARC guide, and let's have a look at what appears here under NS14. Again, all of the bullets are knowledge statements. They're logically grouped. So here's a series of knowledge statements just about defense in depth. Here's a knowledge statement, set of knowledge statements about defense in depth in action. And then finally, a set of knowledge statements about multi-layer network architecture components. So let's see if we can talk through this and make a little bit of sense of those 3 sets of knowledge statements. Defense in depth. I'm over here on the top left. Defense in depth is the application of multiple independent countermeasures in a layered manner to achieve the desired level of security. So just stop at that sentence alone. It's the application, that's important, of multiple independent countermeasures. So multiple countermeasures independent countermeasures. And it happens in a layered manner. So we don't just have multiple countermeasures at the same layer. It happens in a layered manner to achieve the desired level of security. Desired level. That's important. Not all systems need the same level of security. So implied in that statement is some awareness that something that's protecting open source information probably requires less security by design versus something that is highly confidential, highly classified. So you select your multiple independent countermeasures and layer them according to the level of protection you need. So just stopping just with that one sentence and trying to read into its meaning, you understand that this probably connects to things elsewhere in the course that talks about how there are different levels of security, how some things need to be highly confidential, some things need to have a high degree of integrity, whereas others might need to have less confidentiality but high availability. And in fact, that is the case. CIA is addressed pretty deeply in other parts of the CSEC learning outcomes and knowledge statements. Defense in Depth is a multifaceted strategic plan. Multifaceted and strategic, purposeful, using a series of barriers so that if one defense fails, another is in place. So hopefully that gives you a lot of rich context to say to yourself, do I teach all of this? Are there things that I need to beef up about what I teach with regard to what defense in depth is? Second knowledge statement. The principle of layering slows the progress of an attacker. It doesn't necessarily prevent everything. It slows the progress. Layers must each be overcome for an adversary to breach a system, to get further and further in. This reminds us that layering can focus on physical, network, and administrative security measures as layers of defense. Some layers defend against external attacks. Some protect against insider threats. Others provide protections not from malicious actors, but just from human error. So that statement itself reminds you to attach defense in depth to attackers if you taught attackers beforehand, or to use it to foreshadow different kinds of attackers because you're going to talk about that next, or in the unit, in 2 units away. And then finally, the last sentence says, independence means that each security layer does not rely on the failure or the proper functioning of another layer to be effective. So this is important that you think about security layers functioning independently. It's meant to work at that layer, and if the layer before it or after it fails, it doesn't affect the proper functioning of that security control at that layer. So there's a lot just in those 4 statements. Defense in depth in action. We have a series of statements from that second set of knowledge statements in NS 14. Let's just look at a couple of them. An external attack may first exploit a firewall vulnerability. Okay. So firewalls are there, but firewalls can have vulnerabilities. But a demilitarized zone contains the firewall breach. It keeps that exploit from spreading. It contains that breach, localizes it. So that sentence there is meant to help you see an attack and a defense in action. Let's look at the next one. An attacker compromises an internal workstation, which is protected by endpoint security. Okay, so there's been a breach of a workstation. The protection there was endpoint security. Now what happens next? Network access control, the next layer of control, ensures that only authenticated devices can then connect to network resources. So it's in a paired way, coupling attack, compromise at one layer, to the concept of the next control that tries to slow the progress of the attacker. So it's showing that in smaller chunks before students have to put it all together into a multifaceted strategic plan. And then we get to the last part, the last set of knowledge statements that come from NS 14, and it talks about all of these components, right? And so now what you're supposed to do is take the components, think about the architecture, think about the attacks you've built for students, the reasoning about an attack at one layer that is successful, is mitigated, is controlled at the next layer, and now you're saying, okay, take all of these that work at various levels of a network architecture and start to think about how you compose a defense in-depth plan. Okay, so hopefully in slowing down and talking through this, you are starting to see how you use the knowledge statements to help you understand what's meant by a particular learning outcome, to help you understand how you might piece things together to teach all of this content, or to identify gaps in what you currently teach and strengthen it, augment it, so that it's more complete and more, hopefully, compelling for students. Okay, so now I haven't yet shown you any of the open-ended items, so I want to do that. So this is an open-ended item. It's numbered NS14.C, and it says, provide an example of how defense in depth could be applied to protect a company's network from both external and internal threats. Okay, so it's a little bit delimited. It doesn't cover all of those knowledge statements. It covers many of them, but not all of them. And then down here in red is a model response that you could use. And I want to show you the open-ended items. So when you come to the PDF, you've gone into the Teach Cyber website and you've downloaded all 6 of the curriculum guides, and you've downloaded the spreadsheet and this file. It's a PDF. open-ended assessment items. And now you're trying to find, because the demo's on NS13 and NS14, you're trying to find open-ended items for NS14. So you can click on this hyperlink. It'll take you right to the network security items. Up here we're at NS1. We want to be at NS14. So we scroll down, and here we go. We find NS14. There's our learning outcome. We know we're in the right place. And here are 1, 2, 3 items that are candidates for us to choose to put on our end of unit assessment, or maybe to use instructionally as discussion prompts or formative assessment. Check for learning as instruction is occurring. And here's the item that I just showed you on the slide. So, altogether, you already know this, ARC has 1,128 total items, 960 are multiple choice. The multiple choice items tend to test recognition, application, and conceptual understanding, whereas the open-ended items tend to test reasoning, analysis, and evaluation. The multiple choice items tend to be basic to intermediate, and the open-ended items tend to be intermediate to advanced. And I'm sure that makes sense to you. So my goal was to try to give you an overview and a little slice with NS13 and 14 so that you could do something next Monday. You could teach a unit or pick a unit that you're teaching in the next month. You could go into the ARC curriculum guides. You could find a learning outcome that matches to what you're going to be teaching. You can read all of the knowledge statements. You can check your content scope and depth. You can decide if you're going to add anything to your unit to enrich it, or if you're just developing it for the first time. It can help you lay out what you need to teach. And then fourth, I wanted to be able to show you how, okay, now I've got a learning outcome. I'm going to go into those ARC item banks. I'm going to use that LO, and I'm going to find items that align to it. So I can put that into my assessment and then try them, as I said, as a formative check or as a discussion prompt. So that's the end of my demo. This is a National Science Foundation funded grant. I told you that at the beginning. The National Science Foundation requires us to have evaluation. And so our external evaluation team at Washington State has created a short survey. It takes less than 3 minutes. They would appreciate it if you would give them feedback on whether you find the ARC resources useful, helpful, and whether or not this brief demo helped you understand how to use the ARC resources for your teaching purposes. I appreciate you spending time with us, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me.